The DIESOL podcast,
Developing innovation in English as a second or other language.
episode 63, Classroom Design for Language Learning.
Welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 63. We are your hosts. I'm Brent Warner.
And I'm Michelle Reyes. And man, Brent, you're finishing the semester? You just finished the semester?
Just finishing, yeah. Just finished.
Ooh.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a long one.
Get your grading done?
Yeah, just finishing that too. And this is my first summer that I am not teaching in as long as I can remember. I don't know. So I'm taking the summer off from teaching, and I'm looking forward to it. It'll be nice.
Very, very cool.
How about you?
Are you doing I don't get summers off.
Right.
I don't take summers off either. For now, I'm going to be starting, I think on the day this episode drops, it will be my first day of supervising. So I'm sort of taking a break from teaching.
So that's cool. What does it mean to be a supervisor?
So I'll be management for a while. I'll be working basically with our teachers, our actual teachers, not our pre-service or language learning teachers. Mm-hmm. I don't know yet what it means. All I know is it's not teaching, so I'm more in the background.
I got promoted to the job and I have no idea what I'm going to do.
No, I've never really wanted to be admin, but this is sort of a temporary try it out, see if you like it, see if it's an area that you want to grow in longer than a few months, or rule it out and go back. So yeah, we shall see. Talk to me at the end of summer.
Okay, I like that system. So you're going to be assistant manager, in so to speak.
Yeah, kind of something like that.
You know what I just saw online?
What?
And I can't believe this. I've never seen this before. I'm sure it's very old, but it cracked me up. Is someone abbreviated assistant manager to ass man.
Nope, not going to be that.
We'll see. No, you said to wait until the end of summer to find out. So we'll be checking back then.
All right.
All right. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about classroom design. Let's jump in. All right.
Okay.
Tell me about classroom design.
So since you're not in the classroom right now, we wanted to talk about how classroom design affects student behavior and their learning environment. Mm-hmm. And we were talking, Brent, you and I were talking about how in my experience back in my K through 12 teaching credential days, which is about a decade and a half ago.
A decade and
a half ago. What I remember is, and this is what I still implement now, but I remember it so clearly. You, as a teacher, you take note of any negative space, and negative space is space that doesn't have, it's blank space basically. And so you want to fill that out intentionally with things or items that will trigger a student to talk or to reinforce something you're learning. Look for colors that will stand out and help memory. So orange, greens, and yellows, which are your basic highlighter colors. You use those for posters, and those are for concepts you want students to notice. You might want to have passive activities, word or logic puzzles here and there. We can do those with Post-its. Mm-hmm. Anything, including items that serve as a conversation pieces related to some kind of theme or topic or something you want to reinforce. So those are the strategies that I remember that I now, of course, with everything, and anytime I'm teaching a new concept, that's what I first envision in my classroom. Mm-hmm. But and many of these strategies were predicated upon brain-based learning, which was really huge at the time. I haven't really kept up with any updates, but I'm still a big fan of brain-based learning. Sure. But we're wondering, and of course, what does that approach look like now in today's classroom? And I know you've done a ton of work on your campus to promote a classroom that benefits or maximizes student learning environment, especially in a language learning school.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm. Yeah.
tell us more.
So this is tricky because part of the conversation is challenging some of that, right? I think what we see
Mhm.
a lot, I mean, we see these like Pinterest or Instagram accounts or whatever where like teachers are decorating their rooms and doing all these like super fancy decorations,
Well,
right?
yeah, but see, when I see those things,
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually turned off to it because then it becomes like a competition of like Martha Stewart classroom.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what that's. I don't think that classroom design is meant to be that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So visually, aesthetically pleasing is one thing for your Instagram or Pinterest shot,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what a language learning classroom. I don't think that's maybe a misconception, right?
Yeah, I think that like some of those people have whatever their intentions are, right? Like they could be really good and like, hey, I want to make this an inviting place for my students, or it could be like, hey, I want to get those likes, smash that like button,
Mhm.
whatever type of thing. But I
And yeah,
think
no offense to that crowd. I mean, there are
no,
some very skilled decorators out there, but does that approach actually maximize student learning, student engagement? So
right. So
that's
so
where
this
we're
is
going
kind
today.
of this is where a little bit of that challenge comes in, is because um, a while ago, I posted some of the redesigns that I've done online, and a lot of people really liked it. But I got some people saying, "Ooh, that feels like static. It feels like a hospital kind of setting." And I'll explain all of this as we kind of get into the weeds a little bit. But yes, I think that there's room and places to have prepared ideas and prepared structures for the design of the room. I also think that there's a really, really big value that kind of got lost in all of this design stuff, which is just the idea of a blank canvas, right? Like a blank canvas gives you endless possibility and endless potential to do whatever you want, to customize it however you like, right? You could paint anything from, you know, uh, whales in the ocean to super abstract Picasso styles to
Math
pencil art,
formulas.
math formulas, whatever it is, right? And so a blank canvas really gives students a lot of opportunity to turn the room into their room, and we'll talk about parts of this and what that might look like. But yeah, it kind of flies in the face of a lot of time that people have spent in like, okay, how am I going to make this chart that's going to be beautiful and it's going to take up this whole wall, and then I'm going to have this thing over there, and it's like all of those things can absolutely be great ideas and they can work really well. I think what we're going to talk about today a little bit is different ways of considering room design. I'm sure I've said it on this show several times before, and I will say it more and more, is that classroom design really is pedagogy, right? Like it is a part of how students learn and a part of how they get into things. And so we kind of wanted to share some of that as I've been going through the last few years, kind of learning for myself and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And so I've been redesigning several of the rooms on our campus, and I actually talked about this quite a bit on my other podcast, on the Higher Edtech podcast. But I'm really happy to be able to talk about it here because I want to focus it, for our language learners and for our language learning teachers as well. So, a lot of this came out of a book. It's a really great book called Building Thinking Classrooms by Peter Liljedahl, Liljeddahl. And it's actually called Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics. But I really think it's a shame that it's called that because
Mhm.
I feel like so many people are going to miss out on the opportunities because they're like, I'm not a math teacher, and so therefore I shouldn't be looking at this. But I learned about this through, different people at Q who are doing room redesigns, all sorts of things like that. And I started kind of doing some research and looking at how rooms are built and how students are interacting with things. And so just briefly want to just look at the surface of what Liljedal talks about. And so he's got these 11 elements of teaching, and he goes all into it in his book. And so I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll read a few of them and then kind of see where we're focusing in. So he says, the 11 elements that he's looking at in his book and in his classroom designs is the types of tasks used and when and how they're used, the way in which tasks are given to students, how groups are formed, and then these are the two that I want to kind of focus in on. So student workspace while they work on tasks, and room organization, both in general and when students work on tasks. So, and then it goes on. He's got quite a few more ideas inside of there, but I really want to get into those number 4 and 5, which is like, what do workspaces look like for students, and what does room organization look like for students?
And Brent, you said this was building
thinking classrooms.
Thinking classrooms in mathematics. Yeah, that would have not appealed to me because of in mathematics. Never. I would have just imagined numbers, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and okay. I think that's a big concern. So that's why I always tell people is like, go check out people who are teaching different things, right? Because that's where you might get some really interesting ideas. I went to some presentations by Ed Campos, who's a math teacher, and I went by presentations by Bill Selleck. So like just different people who are doing different things out there. But it's like, oh, okay, I have a cool chances to learn and see what they're doing. And then, good pedagogy doesn't matter what the subject is, right? It's like, okay, how am I engaging students? How are we getting stuff going? And so so a lot of this kind of comes through those ideas, and I'm going to share a few of these ways that we've done things, and I will also put up, I have a little presentation on
photos.
This. Yeah.
We need the photos. Oh my gosh, you've got some amazing photos.
So I've got little photos and videos. I've actually just got a presentation. I'll put the presentation embed the slides right into
show notes,
right into the show notes, so everybody can go and look at them and take a look through some of these, what the settings are. You can see some of these also on my Instagram from a few months ago when I first posted it. But anyways, in the show notes, you can go figure it out and take a look. But I just want to talk through some of these. So the different setups that we're really talking about here for our classroom, and kind of have to, set your mind into imagination zone here so we can kind of look at this. But you kind of imagine stripping out the entire classroom. So there's nothing in it. All the walls are empty. It's just a totally nothing, right? And then one of the big things is these 360 floor to ceiling whiteboards. And so you can actually get whiteboards just like your normal whiteboards that you have, but they get flipped vertical. And so they go from the ground all the way up to the ceiling, or, as high as you can write and as high as you can reach your arm. And then you line the entire classroom with these, all 4 walls, or as much as you can get going. And what we were able to get on our campus through some funding was these really high quality ones that are like magnetic, right? So they're actually just the exact same things as the whiteboards that we have, but there's a lot more of them because they're stacked vertically and then wrapped all the way around. And so the whole room, when you walk into it, is just a shiny white room, right? And there's nothing else going on in there. So that's part 1, and we'll get to the different parts. This is part 2. We have node chairs. So
node chairs. Yeah.
So I don't know if you've seen these. They're like little chairs on a basket, right? Like that's not a good explanation. they're chairs that have the basket underneath them, right? And so they're on rollers, and so the students can sit down on them. They have the little rotating arm that comes in and out from the side, right? So like you can kind of push it out of the way, or you can pull it in front of you. And then your whole desk is self-contained but on a roller. So everything is right there with you instead of like having a separate desk and a separate chair. Or whatever else it is. So you kind of hold the desk with you as you sit in this rolling chair. And then the third part to it is like just, having Chromebooks in the classroom, hopefully, depending on what's going on, or laptops available. So not having we're trying to get rid of our more static big computers that kind of take up a ton of space. And then finally, we haven't gotten to this on our campus yet, but one of my final goals is to have, instead of a big projector, to have large TV monitors in at least 2 corners of the room. And so So this is kind of the setup that you're going to imagine, and I'll explain why the value for each of these goes on. But let's start with the whiteboards first. So Ishel, we've grown up with whiteboards and chalkboards to whiteboards and that transition and everything. But what do you think of when you think of a whiteboard? Well, like what's the interaction going on there?
I think front of the classroom, your rectangular average board, a couple of students at a time, and then you've got to erase to make room for someone else.
Yeah. So pretty common, right? That's the typical setup there. So maybe you get 5 or 6 students up there if you're, depending on how big your wall up in the front is. They usually kind of try to stand like side by side, and they're kind of like, hey, maybe arms length apart from each other so that they can have enough room to write what they're going to write. And then while they're doing that, what's the rest of the class doing?
Watching.
Yeah, maybe
from the back,
sitting and watching, right?
Waiting.
If we're lucky, waiting, kind of guessing what's going on, maybe whatever else it is, right? And so here with the vertical whiteboards, what happens is you now have unlimited, only the limitation of the size of the room becomes the space that people can work on. So when you're vertical floor to ceiling, what happens is that students then kind of see those lines split on the vertical wall. So let's say it's a 4-foot panel by 8 foot, right? And it's 8 feet high, 4 feet wide. And then you've still got the splitters, like the line between each board. But what happens is that students kind of cluster around that 4-foot section, right? And so then you get the students in groups of 3 or 4 people around a 4-foot section, but it's all the way up and all the way down. So a taller student can write up higher, a shorter student might squat down and write real low. And we've actually seen students really like sitting down on the ground and writing really low. And so they're taking advantage of this entire space. And it's 4 people getting in that 4-foot space. So you can really get a lot of work done inside of there. But then you're looking at the whole room, and it only takes, a few of those sections, 6 of those sections, to fill up a 25 student class, right? So you're like, hey, you've got 3 or 4 groups on one wall and 3 or 4 groups on the other wall and 1 or 2 on one other wall, right? So it's easily taken care of. It's totally like the students have tons of room now to write and to interact on these walls. And so this is a big part of it, right? Is like, hey, we want everybody working on everything all at once rather than like coming up for a few people at a time and
then waiting. Yeah.
Waiting, right? Now, there's lots and lots and lots of interesting research on like the value of all of this. And so just very briefly, this comes out of the book, but like he talks about these ideas. Some of the benefits of doing it is it reduces stalling and faking behaviors, because when you have students like, hey, I'm working on a piece of paper at my desk and the teacher can't really see whether or not I'm doing anything, they might just
quote
kind of
unquote working.
Yeah, they're kind of holding off, or like, okay, well, I'll get started when other people get started or whatever else it is, right? And then by default, that switches right into increased time on task, improving student communication, allowing teachers to see all the work at once. And this is a huge one, right? Because you have been in plenty of classrooms where you're looking out across the classroom and students are supposedly working on something with their heads down, right? Or even as a group, they're working on something, but your horizontal view across and down the classroom isn't really letting you see what they're doing. And so if they move that vertically, right, to the walls around the room, you can stand in the middle of the room and you can just look around and see what's going on at any spot when these students are working together on the wall. Right.
And you don't need to be moving
exactly
from desk to check.
Yeah. And so one, they know that you can see them from farther away, right? But 2, you also can, you don't have to kind of hover over the students to see the work that they're doing, right? So it kind of goes both ways, where it's a benefit to everyone here. It also encourages students to look and kind of feel more comfortable to see what their classmates are doing, like on the group next to them or on the other side of the room. They're like, are we on track, right? Are we doing the right type of thing, or are we not doing the right type of thing? So they can look at that. More equal participation. And then also here's a big one, which is with the whiteboards. Super important compared to paper is that they can be a little bit messier, and it's a lot more closer to their real learning, right? Because when you give a pen and a paper to a student, they feel like whatever they write is going to be permanent, and they're going to hesitate to get that down. Do you remember that feeling?
How many times you give them a poster board with markers and they're just sort of debating on who's going to be the one to write, because you don't want to be the messy one who has the messy writing, and then they're just sort of afraid of getting started, which is like, this is not about how neat it looks. Get your ideas flowing, get those brains thinking, get those conversations going.
Yeah, and the ink is a big deal for that. Ink to paper is like you'll see people freeze up and they're like, well, can we get some pencils so we can
Or can we get another piece of paper, an extra one? Yep.
Yeah, all these types of things, because they just feel like that's so permanent, and it doesn't even come out verbally like that, right? They're not like, oh, I like sometimes they might say, well, what if I make a mistake? But most of the time it's just kind of in the back of their head that they're holding off on starting to do that. And with the whiteboards, they will not. They'll just go, oh, okay, whatever.
They'll want to play first, right? They want to,
sure, because they know they can erase
and
it.
they've got free range too.
And then finally, the last part here is that it gets them moving, so they get like this physiology connected to their learning, right? So that goes back to the good old TPR and all of those fun things. But what you can kind of start to imagine is like, okay, well, there's a lot of value in having these whiteboards going on. There's a lot of opportunity for interaction, for building, for making your work and then your language grow, but also working together with everybody else. So that's just the whiteboards here. So then we're going to switch to the chairs, right? We talk about this, this phrase comes up, the cemetery seating, right?
So morbid.
Yeah, it's very morbid. But like, I mean, you're front to back, right? You're sitting right behind somebody else and you're looking at them and you're going, well, okay, what are you doing? Like, what's the back of your head look like? I'm going to bore stare a boring hole right into the back of your head, right? And so, but it really is just like being in a cemetery, right? And so it can be fine. Like that type of setup can be fine, right? But you really want to think about what a room looks like and what it conveys to people when they walk in. So, Esol, for you, you've been in plenty of classes, you've been in conferences, you've been in, different types of places. So, when
Well, I know when I want to hide and I don't want to be called on by the speaker or the instructor or whomever, I'll sit in the back to the side. If I want to escape quickly, I'll sit in the back to the side. If I want to be acknowledged, if I want to receive the most direct information and make sure I don't miss anything, I will sit in the front and to the middle, when in the teacher's T zone, right? Because that's where the speaker is going to be walking. So I'll sit where, I mean, it's usually in those areas, but I sure do know where I want to be sitting, right. Especially in a room that is linear, very much like that. Your cemetery, it's speaker focused, right?
Yeah. Well, and you've got your escape plan all worked out. Like, and again, you might not be consciously thinking about that, but depending on your personality or how comfortable you are or whatever else, you might be planning that already, right? And it's pretty easy. So like you walk into that room. So let's imagine you just see rows of chairs with no desks, right? All rowed up all the way down the line, pointing towards the front. What do you imagine is going to happen in that classroom?
You're just going to listen and listen.
Right. It's going to be a lecture. You're going to listen, probably not really doing much writing because unless you're taking notes on your knees, right? Something like that. It's not great. I mean, it's fine. Again, it could be for that purpose. Like that could be what the intention of the lesson is, and a straight lecture and like, hey, let's just listen and talk here. That could be fine. But imagine that compared to stepping into a room that has, 10 big round tables in it, right? What do you imagine is going to happen there?
Well, automatically there will be other people there, but it'll be small groupings where for me, and I was just thinking, man, as an introvert, the room with the linear rows would give me anxiety if it's really crowded. I would definitely sit in the back on the side areas, the side the corners because I don't want to be that close to someone that I don't know.
Mhm.
However, it would be safer to be in smaller groups.
Yeah. Exactly. So you're like, oh, okay, hey, there's tables. I'll probably only have to interact with 3 or 4 people, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Like hopefully these people are kind of cool, but I don't have to get that overwhelm of everybody, right?
Right.
And also with those just rows of chairs, like you end up super close to the person next to you. And with the table,
Yeah.
you're like,
And then
hey,
you only have a choice of two
yeah,
to the left and to the right.
yeah,
And I guess, because you're not going to be talking to the person in front of you since they're also limited. But at a round table, you could be talking to the person across from you or next to you. So the chances of finding someone that you connect with are a little bit bigger, but also in a safe environment, a safe group, I suppose.
yeah, yeah. And then just a last potential scenario is like, what if you come into a room that has kind of like a big conference table in the middle, right? It's like, hey, long table. You got some spots next to each other, maybe bigger, more comfortable chairs, but you have other people next to you, right? So what's your
Mm-hmm.
thinking there? I'm not going to make you answer this one,
Mm-hmm.
the idea is imagine all these different
Mm-hmm.
types of scenarios. Subconsciously, we already have a setting when we walk into that room about
Right.
what that means. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you dread knowing, oh, we're having the faculty meeting or whatever meeting in such and such room, and you're thinking, oh man, or why can't we have it over there, right? Like you already know.
Yeah, for sure. So all of these different types of settings, right? They just bring up different emotions. They bring up different
Hmm.
expectations. They bring up different
Different behavior patterns, even.
absolutely, absolutely. So this is kind of the idea is like, well, these are the things that we start thinking about when we're designing classrooms because we're saying, well, what are the behavior patterns we want from our students? What are the expectations? How can we make them feel more welcomed? Or if you're introverted or if you're extroverted, like how can you accommodate that? Both different types of students or the ambiverts in the middle too, right? Like what's going to be the
Hmm.
setting for each of them. So the setting that we kind of have been building at our campus in some of our classrooms is um, these chairs, these node chairs, and they kind of cluster so you can roll them together into little groups of 3 or 4 people, and the students can sit together in small groups, but then they can also back out and back away from each other into larger. They can actually slide back into a full circle wrapping around the classroom. And
Hmm.
I was in Susan Akavan, we talk about her sometimes. She was in
Hmm.
I was in her classroom. She's using one of these rooms, and it was so cool because I went to observe, and she had all the students clustered in little groups, and then she started talking to them, and she didn't say anything. She just started talking to the class, and they kind of recognized, oh, we're done with our group work, and they all kind of magically, like a drop of oil in water, like they just spread out and they formed a perfect circle around her. So she was in the middle, and then they were all around her, kind of centering in on her, and that just happened totally naturally, which couldn't happen in a traditional desks all facing the same direction setup, right? They kind of, oh, okay, well, we have to kind of get uncomfortably move our stuff back around or whatever else it is. And so all of this is kind of different ways. And then not to mention, if they're in those little clusters, there's no real front of the classroom, right? Because now she can
Hmm.
walk around to any wall and she can start writing, and now the students can see what she's doing. All they have to do is twist their movable desks that they're on and point themselves to whatever area she's at. But then, the teacher can then move on to the other side of the room, and it's like, wait a second, I thought I was in the back of the classroom, and now I'm in the front. Now I'm front row, right? And
Hmm.
so students don't really have that control anymore, but they also know that they're going to be engaged and brought into the classroom rather than like someone who can sneak away and hide in the back. Um, and
Me.
so there's a lot of interesting potential there. So students one can't hide, but then everybody also is kind of equal in this whole setting. And then the final setup here that I'm looking for, my last setup here in these rooms is in 2 corners, opposite corners, to have giant television monitors instead of maybe a projector pointing at one wall, because that
Hmm.
projector still makes a front of the classroom by default.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, well, that's where the front of the classroom is. Doesn't matter what else you say. But if you have 2 TVs in different corners, then the students might face one direction depending on where they're already sitting. They might just be able to point themselves quickly at one or the other, or just twist their head a little bit without having to do massive movements to see what's going on. But then they also are aware, hey, this isn't the front, this isn't the back, this is just where that information is being presented to me, and now I'm going to have this whole idea. So this is this concept that
sports bar.
So exactly, it is like a sports bar. So like Lil Jadal calls this defronting the classroom, because you go, well, where's the front of the sports bar, right? It doesn't matter where I sit, I can see this,
and you're not missing out on anything.
Yeah, so this is kind of the goal here with this type of setup. And we can go on and on and on about it. I think there's a lot of interesting parts to this, and I think the biggest thing that I'm hoping that that teachers listening will kind of think about is like, well, oh yeah, I don't just have to settle for the classroom that I have, right? I don't just have to settle for this type of setup that's been traditional. Like how can I engage students? Because now if I don't have a front, if I have them clustering in little groups, or if I have them sharing and coming out, accordioning out into a bigger group altogether, and then moving back into smaller groups, there's all sorts of really, really fun and interesting potential. And ways to start thinking about how your students might change their learning styles or their approach to the class because of the ways that they have to now interact in a different setting, if that all makes sense.
Great. So let's switch over and talk about how to make this work in my classroom, which is not the the large classroom that you have.
Right.
Thank you for supporting the show. You can leave us a review on iTunes. We have a Patreon, and you could buy us a coffee if you want on our site, or you can share the show with a colleague.
That would be nice. Thank you. Okay, so Esol, here is the deal, right? It's like, it's real nice and easy, and you go, oh, Brent was able to get these put into his classroom. So which I'm going to point out, it was not easy to get done from the beginning. It took a lot of work convincing. Some of my colleagues were on board early on, and some people were like, that's not really what we're going to be spending money on here. And it took several years to kind of really get this going as a concept. But the one thing that I do get concerned about is having these conversations is people are like, oh, well, your school has money, or you have a different type of setup than I do. What you did could not possibly be done in my setting, right? And I think your scenario is a good challenge to this, because you are definitely in a unique teaching setting. Let's talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, one of the things when we started this conversation is like, well, I don't see that working in my classroom, which is probably and I've heard other people say that about other things, not necessarily the classroom design, but just other things like technology or certain approaches, strategies, etc. So, right? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, that the idea that might work for you, but it wouldn't work for me because I've got reason 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah.
So you've got a large classroom. It probably fits about 20-ish students.
30,
right.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm not complaining about the size of my class, which is at the largest is 10 students maximum. However, our rooms are also pretty small. And I'm sure that there are going to be teachers out there who are moving from room to room all the time, or aren't in the same room every semester, or they're placed in a room that is not really meant to be a classroom, but that was the room available, which happened to me one time. I had a storage closet at USC.
Yeah, I had that joke. Room too. Yeah, it was literally a storage closet when we taught at USC, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then you open that little extra door. Remember that? And it's like, what is in there?
Creepy.
Probably shouldn't be looking. Yeah.
Right. And so you've got the nice, 4 bare walls, but what about classrooms that are oddly shaped? Because perhaps there were rooms that were repurposed into a classroom, and now you've got closet doors that maybe are not made of a material that you could, tack things onto, like paper, for example. Or you've got permanent whiteboards that are taking up most of your main walls, right? Front or back of the room. or you've got protrusions that you really don't have a choice. You're not going to, build the whole structure again. So what do you do with that? And so we were talking and we were brainstorming. What do you do in that situation? Just because your organization has the ability to have, what did you call them? The vertical whiteboards,
the vertical whiteboards.
The whole full thing. You and I were talking about how, okay, well, the door that I have, that's, a closet door where I can't hang really anything. We could put a whiteboard film on there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, if I needed to put a paper poster, I could always do that. Like one of those giant sticky notes.
Yes. So this is where you're going to start, right? Like it doesn't have to be the expensive solution, right? It can be, I can go on Amazon and I can buy tack paper that is, whiteboard style tack paper, and I can write on, dry erase paper. I think we'll put some links in the show notes, but you can get these types of things, right? And you can just go put it up. Now it might not be beautiful, it might be kind of the hack way into getting this going, but you can start getting more spaces where people can interact on some bigger settings of that section of the wall can be used, right? Now,
yeah.
To point out, the first thing I think you said is like, hey, we've got these horizontal whiteboards. They start at the 3.5 feet mark and they finish at the 7.5 feet mark. And then guess what's going on? Everything below your waist is
waste.
Waste. Right? And everything above your arm is arm.
Also waste.
Yeah, waste is also waste. Okay, there we go. Good. But like, hey, okay, for sure, like if you don't have the funding for it, start looking into finding ways to get funding, right? You can do grants, you can do all these different things, you can reach out, but if not, you can start with just doing it yourself, right? So you can get this sticky paper, you can get the film or whatever, and just pin it up and have it working. Esol, you were saying before, like you've got TVs that can't be used.
There's just right? Like monitors that aren't functioning. There's no service for them, but they take up the space, so it just looks odd in the room. And so what many of my colleagues and myself, we've done all sorts of interesting things. I used it as a photo album, so I'd put all the photos of my students, so it actually creates a conversation. My students go and look at the photos from previous classes. Some teachers drape blankets over them. I've seen people perch plants over them, because it really just, it's wasting space. And students constantly ask, why can't we use it? And of course, for whatever reason, they're not functional, but we don't have the authority to remove them.
Right.
And so we haven't been able to do that. And so now what do we do with that wasted space? Because it's also, if you've got windows on that wall, now you really are wasting the good space where those students who are not facing the boards could actually be using it. Or you could be, you could have passive displays or all sorts of things there, and put some sticky film on it and let the students go at it.
That's the thing, right? So let's say you've got a 55-inch monitor, right? That's a big chunk of space, right?
It is a big chunk of space.
You can put that sticky film right on top of it. Here's another thing is windows are writing space, right? Like depending on what you're looking at out there, you can give people an Expo dry erase marker and they can write directly on a window and you can just wipe it off later, right? Like a window is the same thing. It's the same glass as a whiteboard. And so you can actually, when students have a chance to write on windows, they get all excited about it because they've never done it before.
It's vandalism, and you're allowing them to do it, sort of like writing on desks.
Yeah, and I do that too with my desks. We've got these big round desks, and you've seen some on my Instagram, like the students are writing out their ideas just right directly on the desk. All of these things, just one quick wet wipe away from being clean. And so you have all of these different settings that we might originally go, hey, I can't use that, that's wasted space, but we go, well, let's just do a little tweak and we can make this work. I see. There's nothing wrong with writing on a glass window. Yeah, absolutely. It's just another surface. So we cannot limit ourselves to, if you're in another country, for example, where you don't have
legit board from the store, you're going to use any writing surface. You're going to use a ground. You're going to use a stump of wood. So what's stopping you from using a piece of glass that can be wiped clean, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that that's worth rethinking the way that when we step into our classroom, looking at all of that again with fresh eyes, and not for that wall is just for this, that bulletin board is just for that. That actually really limits your creativity and the space that the students have. And I think you were talking about giving the students freedom to roam, freedom to move around. And I see this in my classroom when I try to, I have a lot of displays here, and I have things hidden for them to hide because it creates a conversation spot. And then so students will go to that conversation spot and they'll talk, and it generates conversation, generates interaction, and it was sort of organic but also intentional. And if you can do that by removing those boundaries that we already kind of, in a classroom, it's four walls and it contains you and your class. And if you remove those, I don't know, they're limiting thoughts, right? If we can get rid of those, then we can do so much with even a limited space like what I have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we haven't even started talking about like desks. What's your desk situation look like?
I'm lucky enough that I have. Do I have my chairs are rolling. Okay. but I have chair to a desk. They're not attached, and that's because it's too small, and we've got to be able to put students into groups and have enough room. In case our rooms are small, so in case of a fire or in case of anything like that, you've got to be able to move things. If we only have a class of 5 students, we can put away the desks in that little storage closet. We don't have like a big one. You're limited to very little storage space. So in that way, I actually have felt like I can do a lot with groupings. And I even had an instructor yesterday stop by my room as I was rearranging it for the week. And she said, I like to see what other teachers are doing with their rooms, because I feel like mine is too focused on the smartboard, and my smartboard doesn't work. So again, and so she looked at mine and she said, I thought I was going to go crazy by having them in groups of 3. And I thought, no, that's perfect. And then you can walk around. There is no center, and the students can get up, and you're not limited. So there's space. And when you have space, you have freedom, right? And so that translates into freedom to move your body around, freedom to think beyond what you normally would, instead of being cramped, in that little chair next to somebody.
So that's perfect, because you have a setup where it's like, hey, these chairs already serve good purpose, right? You've already thought them through. You've thought different ways to work with them. These desks can be moved. Like, hey, I really like this setup, right? Other people, so like our previous desks were the ones that were like the chair or the desk that had the bar underneath that went to the chair, and so it was all one big piece. You know what I'm talking about? Like they're like the desk is in front of you, and then there's the
little board thing.
Well, I mean, like on the ground, like the actual desk is a bar, and then that bar wraps up into the chair, and so it's like everything is one big piece, and it's real hard to move around. And so it's like, okay, what do I do with those? And again, nothing is good or bad here. It's like, what is it working or not working for your setting, right? And so how are you rearranging it? How are you making it? And are you challenging yourself to go, like when you step into a room, to say, this needs to be changed, or yes, this is exactly what I'm already looking for. This is the best setup that I can have out of this setting, right?
So Brent, you're reminding me of my days at USC, where some of the larger rooms made to accommodate obviously larger groups. In our language program there, we had tables, movable tables, and each table I think fit maybe 4 students per side, per the longer side. And I would go in and I would, I didn't have my own classroom, so I'd be, taking over another classroom, and I'd go in there to start my class, and it would be a row of tables, right? So the first row, obviously, gets more of me. And my students knew from day one, we're not having this. We're arranging it into this square. And inside of the square, there's like a T. So I would put tables inside so they could turn around and face someone close to them. So they didn't have to go all the way across the room. And also I could walk freely around and they could walk freely around. And so that way they're not focusing on getting help from me all the time, because also the way that you set up your room will also tell you if they're interacting more with you than with each other. And oftentimes that's when you have to keep asking you for help. They're not talking to the people around them.
Right.
And so that creates a very limiting and almost like there's too much control. But I remember thinking, no, with these tables, they're movable. We can have all sorts of shapes within there. And then sure enough, other teachers, I don't know if they either really liked it or if they didn't care to have the students move them, but they kept that setup. And that was just automatic, the default setup in any of my classes. And of course, that meant also if I wanted to sort of step back behind the tables to the back of the room and hide so students could not really get help from me, then it would force them to talk to each other. Yeah. And I could just simply observe sort of like from an outside point of view. And I love that. I remember thinking this is the greatest thing because I could just sit back here, relax for 5 minutes and then go and explain APA.
Yeah. And I mean, that's all, what we're trying to get to in this whole conversation is understanding that, right? Because you're saying, hey, I do know that there's just a lot of teachers that just walk into a room and they go, what do I have to work with? Okay. And now I'm just going to run from that. But it's not a matter of like, how can I change this? What's the conversion that I can make to better support the students, to give them a better chance to understand or to work together or whatever else it is. And so it might already be close to in place, but with the turn of one desk, right? Like in that sitting, right? That's all it takes. Or, hey, all I'm going to do is go buy this $10 or $20 thing on Amazon, and I'm going to hang this up in another place, and people can now interact with the new surface. And then here's the real thing is that after you start doing this, just like you're saying, Esol, hey, people start walking by and seeing it and liking that. And maybe the supervisor walks by and is like, hey, what's going on here? And you're like, oh, this is not really what I would want to be doing. Here's the upgraded version that would actually make sense for the students. And like, hey, can we get funding for that? Can we make that work? And I would also challenge even if you're a part-time teacher or whatever else it is, right? Show these things can help. Like these things can make a difference because people do notice those and they do pay attention. And if the right person sees it, then that can be the biggest shift, right? Like that can be all it takes.
Right. And I wanted to mention one more thing. When students feel that they can share and have freedom, they'll tell their classmates about it who are in a different class. And pretty soon those classmates go to that classroom to hang out because there's freedom there. I often had, colleagues perhaps sometimes saying, why don't you kick your students out at break? Don't you need a break? Well, I don't talk to the students during my break. They just come in there. But while I'm sitting there, I'm often listening to see what they're talking about. And oftentimes they go to spaces where I've posted something and that sparks a conversation. And I've seen so many times a student who didn't know someone else get introduced to someone, and then a friendship ignites or is the beginning of a friendship, just, a short friendship, but now there's a connection to someone else and they are having conversations. And I didn't force them to have a conversation in English. They're doing it on their own. And then of course that transfers to outside of the classroom, which I think is one of my happiest moments is when I overhear that. And I didn't even do anything. Yeah. But I'm just an observer and it's like, oh, this is why it's worth it, right, putting the effort into it.
Absolutely. So again, it's really start cheap, right? Start with the simple things that you can do. You don't have to get super fancy. If if you say, hey, I think this can work. I see we have a funding mechanism in place to be able to get cool things, try it out in a room, pilot it, right? There's all sorts of parts to this, but it is a huge, and it makes a big difference to the students as they're engaging. Like you're saying, hey, I want to spend more time in this place. It's inviting. And then when they start working and writing on the walls, then it's like, it's their work, right? It's their classroom. By definition is theirs because it's all filled with their own work and their own writing and whatever else it is. So, so again, I hope that this conversation just kind of opens up the potential for like, what can a classroom design do to change the dynamics, right? I think that's really the thing that we want to look at and see.
And avoid Pinterest. Because that'll cost you so much money. You don't need that.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean equal learning.
This room is a Harry Potter themed classroom. And it's like, that is really cool.
Yeah, it's cool, but imagine when you have to take it down at the end of the summer. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's empty room in, empty room out for me. Yeah, lots to play with here, but I hope it sparked a few ideas.
All right, it is time for our fun finds. And of course, the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial just wrapped up. And although I'm not a fan of either, I'm neutral.
Of course.
But a YouTube video popped up with this lawyer, attorney, or former prosecutor, I think, Emily D. Baker. Okay. And she just had such an interesting commentary, very educational. I sat there and watched her, and I learned so much about the court system. And that's why she was my fun find. She breaks down all sorts of pop culture type of cases, which I think is quite, she's a millennial. So she likes to break them down and see how the law now can or can't protect or should change or hasn't changed, especially when it comes to our tech run world and pop culture. So it was so interesting. You could really learn a lot from her. But the fun find was her Control F Yourself shirt.
Okay.
So another geeky thing to add to my collection of geeky shirts.
Nice. Control F yourself. Got it. I don't know how to follow that, but I'll. So mine, you might be surprised by this. I'm going to pick a musician, and I have, without my own knowledge or consent, fallen in love with Harry Styles.
What?
I know, he's so good. Like Harry Styles,
he is very good. He's very, very good.
He has a new album out called Harry's House.
I didn't even know you knew who Harry Styles is.
We can get into this, I guess. He's like the modern Bowie, right? Like he has like all this interesting eclectic taste in music, and it goes all over the place, from like 80s synth pop to like ZZ Top style rock to like Andrew Bird folk style. It's just really like I just keep being like blown away. I'm like, well, this is really good. And I remember actually seeing him a couple of years ago, showed up on Saturday Night Live, I think. And I was like, oh, why do I like this guy? And it's because he's very intentional. He's very like solid with his music. And it's kind of like, it's got an aura, an ambience to his music. So like, I don't love all of the lyrics. It's not like it's the most amazing, like insightful lyrics in that sense, but like the musical style and the buildings and everything. And so anyways, his new album is, obviously Harry Styles needs me promoting his music, but it's called Harry's House. And like, if you like if you kind of came up in independent music and exploring with different styles, I was really surprised that I'm like, Harry Styles kind of rocks, and I think I'm gonna go see him in concert, me and a bunch of teenage girls, and it'll be
there will be millennials there. Don't worry.
Yeah, there'll be millennials there, so I'll be good with that.
You'll be the oldest one of them.
For sure. You'll be like a
Wait, so how did you find out about hairstyles like this? I gotta know.
well, yeah. So like I said, a couple of years ago, the first time was on Saturday Night Live.
So
that was
it was
passively. I was like, oh, that's like surprisingly good, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then an interview came up with him on NPR, and they were playing samples of the songs while he was talking through them, and I was like actually listening to the songs at the same time. I'm like, it's kind of rad, like surprisingly. So I downloaded it and I listened to it, and yeah, it's a very solid album. So
this is a judgment-free zone. So I applaud your broad taste in music.
I'm growing.
So BTS next.
Let's wrap up the show.
All right. You could win a one-of-a-kind Diesel pin by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you're giving us a shout out any other way, which we also love, please be sure to tag us on social media. We are on all the platforms.
We do have a Patreon if you want to support the show. It's available on diesel.org somewhere. You can find us. And we also have show notes, of course, for this episode at diesel.org/63. That's the number 63. And of course, you can listen to us at VoiceEd Canada as well. You can find us on Twitter. The show is at DieselPod, and I am at Brent G. Horner.
I am Esol at IXY_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY. In Malay, thank you is terima kasih. Terima kasih for tuning in to the Diesel Podcast.